The year is 1793. Louis XVI has just been executed. France is devastated by its civil war and is now threatened by the First Coalition. Paranoia and terror, oh terror, grips the country by its throat as the people demand more and more purges. As a result, almost 17,000 were executed in just over a year. France now lives under the tyranny of the Committee of Public Safety, with at its head Maximilien Robespierre. On April 1792, the largely Girondist Legislative Assembly declared war on Austria, thus starting the War of the First Coalition. Unprepared and weakened by the revolution, France quickly suffered disastrous defeats, and Robespierre, along with Danton, a revolutionary who later that year became the chief force behind the overthrowing of the monarchy and the establishment of the First Republic, feared a military coup d'etat. They were especially concerned by Le Marquis de Lafayette, who had openly advocated for the dissolution of the Jacobin Club. During that time, in June 1792, Robespierre had proposed an end to the monarchy and the subordination of the Assembly to popular will. And in September, despite the insults and accusations of the Girondins, he was elected as first deputy of Paris to the National Convention, which had now replaced the Legislative Assembly. There, he and his closest supporters sat on the highest benches of the Assembly, thus acquiring the nickname Les Montagnards. Later that year, following the early success of the Austrians and the captures of two fortresses, the Parisians were afraid the city would soon be captured, and its aristocratic prisoners freed to take part in the city's sacking. As a result, more than 1,300 prisoners, most common criminals, were massacred in what would later be known as the September Massacre. The Girondins quickly accused Robespierre of failing to stop this massacre, as well as trying to install a dictatorship along with Marat, a radical journalist turned politician, and Danton, a Roman triumvirate, much like Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus. Robespierre turned these accusations back to them as he delivered some of the most famous lines of the revolution. Citizens, do you want a revolution without a revolution? What is the spirit of persecution which has directed itself against those who freed us from chains? These words marked a profound divide between the two Jacobin factions, the Montagnards and the Girondins, which, along the fall of Louis XVI, the September Massacre, and the invasion of France, tilted the balance towards further extremism in the country. And on the 14th of January 1793, Louis XVI was voted guilty of conspiracy and attacks upon public safety after the discovery of compromising documents in his chambers. At his trial, in direct contradiction to his past tense on the death penalty, Robespierre strongly pushed for the king's execution through a famous speech that he finished by stating, "With regret, I pronounce this fatal truth. Louis must die so the nation may live." On the 21st, at 5 in the morning, Louis XVI was woken up in his cell. At 10 a.m., he arrived at the place of the execution, the first political execution of the revolution, a drop in the bucket against the 16,594 more that would come the following year, as the sharp sound of the guillotine echoed in la Place de la Révolution, announcing a new reign, the reign of terror. Following the execution of the king, the people of Paris became increasingly restless. France's economic situation was rapidly deteriorating, and the Girondins, who controlled the National Convention, were blamed for failing to deliver the gains the revolution had promised. As a result, their influence wavered further and further to the benefit of radicals such as Robespierre and Danton. This was further exacerbated by accusations of royalism following their appel au peuple, a referendum to let the people decide the king's fate. As an example of France's violent shift towards extremism, the Girondins, which had been considered radicals just a couple of years ago, were now accused of being too conservative. One of these accusers was Marat, who denounced them for bringing France to its ruins, as he decried "Nous sommes trahis," a chant that was picked up all over Paris, which now largely supported the Montagnards thanks to their revolutionary zeal. Eventually, the capital's hostility towards their leading party was such that riots arose in retaliation of the foolish arrest of Marat on the 18th of May, 1791. His exoneration a few days later did little to calm public outrage, and when on the 25th, Maximilien Robespierre, leader of the Girondins, threatened to march France upon Paris, the Parisians responded by marching themselves to the Tuileries Palace, where the National Convention was held. There, they demanded the removal of 22 leading Girondins from the convention, as Robespierre advocated for moral insurrection against the corrupt deputies of the Jacobin Club. These insurrections would start on the 27th of May and culminate on the 2nd of June, when François Henriot, at the head of 80,000 sans-culottes, lower-class Parisians that could not afford to wear la culotte, as the bourgeois and nobles did, surrounded and aimed 160 cannons at the Tuileries. When the president of the National Convention, Marie-Jean Ayrault, sent a messenger to demand that Henriot stops his intimidations, Henriot replied, "Tell your fucking president that I don't give a fuck about him and his assembly, and that if in 1 hour you don't deliver me the 22, I will blow you up." As a result, the convention attempted to escape, only to be pushed back by Henriot's order to man the guns. Finally, the situation was solved after the convention voted in favor of the suspension and arrest of 29 Girondins, including their leader, Brissot. On the 24th of October, 22 of them were tried by the Revolutionary Tribunal, and 7 days later, they were guillotined. It took only 36 minutes to execute them all. The National Convention was now purged of its Girondin majority, giving full reign to the Montagnards, giving full reign to the Committee of Public Safety, Danton and Robespierre. Hello everyone, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please consider leaving a like, sharing, commenting, and if you haven't yet, subscribing. This was Barris. I will see you next week, but until then, merde!